Hello, welcome to the course PH5VO6 Electrodynamics 2. The contents of this course is taken from Introduction to Electrodynamics by David J. Griffiths. In today's class, we will continue to discuss topics from Chapter 7 Electrodynamics. If you recollect the electrostatics chapter, we have derived an expression for energy stored in electric field. This is nothing but the work done against the Coulombic force to set up a charge collection. In the same manner, let's see what is the energy stored in magnetic field. In the last class, when I discussed about the concept of back EMF, I told you whenever a current in a circuit changes, you need to do work against the back EMF. So to start current flowing in a circuit, work must be done against the back EMF, which means there is a requirement of energy. Now back EMF is nothing but work done per unit charge. So work done on a unit charge against the back EMF is minus E, where E is the back EMF. Similarly, the amount of charge per unit time passing down the wire is I. The work done per unit time you can write as work done per charge multiplied by charge per unit time. Charge cancel, you have work done per unit time. So this quantity work done per unit time dW by dt, work done per charge, which is minus back EMF multiplied by charge per unit time, which is the current. Now from the Flex law you can write EMF E equal to minus L into di by dt. We have seen this result in the last class. So dW by dt equal to L into I into di by dt. So work done per unit charge is integral of this, which is half into Li square. Now let's try to get a more generic expression for the work done. If you have a current carrying loop, the flux associated with the loop is nothing but integral B dot dA. Magnetic field you can write in terms of magnetic vector potential as curl of A. So phi equal to integral curl of A dA. Using Stokes theorem, you can convert this surface integral into line integral and write closed line integral A dot dl. Now flux can be written in terms of self-inductance as L into I, where L is the self-inductance. So L into I equal to closed integral A dot dl. We know the expression for work done per unit charge. This is half into Li square. Li is this much, so you can write work done equal to half into I into integral A dot dl. When we talk about a wire, a one-dimensional configuration, the direction of current and direction of a segment of wire, both are same. So you can interchange these two and write half into closed integral A dot I into dl. So this is the case of one-dimensional current. Let's take the most generic case, the 3D current, where current density is J. So the same equation gets modified as work done per unit charge equal to half volume integral A dot J d tau. Now from the Ampere's law we know curl of B equal to mu naught J. So instead of J I can write curl of B divided by mu naught. So this expression gets modified as work done equal to 1 over 2 mu naught integral A dot curl of B d tau. Now from the product rule in vector analysis, we know that del dot A cross B equal to B dot curl of A minus A dot curl of B. And this is discussed in chapter 1. If any of you want, you can look up the proof for this theorem in chapter 1. So if you rearrange the terms here, you get A dot curl of B equal to B dot B minus del dot A cross B. Now from the expression for work done, we can substitute for this term. So work done becomes 1 over 2 mu naught integral B dot B is B square d tau minus del dot A cross B d tau. Now this volume integral I can convert into surface integral using Gauss theorem. So the expression for work becomes 1 over 2 mu naught volume integral B square d tau minus surface integral A cross B dA. So far the integration is done over the volume occupied by the current. Now let's scale up the problem and do the integration over the entire space. Now in this figure, if you assume that this small cube is the area where we have the current and the magnetic field associated with the current, and the large cube is the entire space. Okay. So far we have done integration in this small cube. Now we want to extend this integration to this large cube. So what happens to these terms? Let's first think about the volume integral. So volume integral over the entire space is nothing but volume integral over this small cube plus the remaining space. Now current is confined to this small cube. Outside this small cube current is 0. Consequently, the magnetic field and magnetic potential are also 0 in the remaining space. So if you do the volume integral in this remaining space, that's going to be 0. So essentially, when you extend the range of integration, the value of the volume integral doesn't change. What about the surface integral? So once again, what is the surface we are talking about? It is the boundary surface, boundary of this large cube. As you can make out from the figure, the boundary surface is far away from the small cube. As the distance increases, the magnetic field strength and magnetic potential strength both goes to 0. So if you do the surface integral on this boundary surfaces, its value is going to be 0. So we can remove this surface integral. So the expression for work done becomes 1 over 2 mu naught integral all space B square d tau. So remember, we are setting up a current here. So initially there is no current and the magnetic field is also 0. Now when you are setting up the current, slowly current strength increases, the magnetic field strength also increases. Since you have a changing magnetic field, this produces an electric field. Finally, when you reach the maximum value of the magnetic field, there is no more change in the magnetic field strength. Consequently, the electric field becomes 0. So at the starting point and ending point, you have no electric field. In between, you have an electric field. And the work done is nothing but work done against this electric field. So this is nothing but the energy stored in the magnetic field. Now if you recollect the results from electrostatic, the work done or the energy stored in the electric field is nothing but half volume integral V rho d tau, where V is the electric potential, rho is the volume charge density, which you can simplify as epsilon naught by 2 integral all space E square d tau. And similarly, in the magnetic field case, you get energy stored in the magnetic field as 1 over 2 mu naught integral B square d tau. In the later chapter, when we discuss about electromagnetic radiation, you will find that the total energy stored in the electromagnetic field or electromagnetic radiation is nothing but sum of the electric energy plus the magnetic energy. Let's do a quick problem. A long coaxial cable carries current I. The current flows down the surface of the inner cylinder of radius A and back along the outer cylinder of radius B. Find the magnetic energy stored in a section of length L. The field between the cylinders, this is given by the Ampere's law as B equal to mu naught I divided by 2 pi s. It's around the along the circumferential direction given by phi cap. Now, energy per unit volume, we have seen this is nothing but 1/2 mu naught B square. So you can write, since B is mu naught I over 2 pi s, this is equal to 1/2 mu naught I by 2 pi s whole square, which is mu naught I square divided by 8 pi square s square. So this is energy per unit volume. Now let's imagine a layer of the cylindrical shell of radius s and thickness ds and length L, and calculate what is the energy stored in this small layer. Okay. So this is energy per unit volume. If you multiply it with volume of the layer, you get total energy stored in that layer. Now volume of this cylindrical shell is the circumference 2 pi s multiplied by thickness ds multiplied by length. So energy stored in the small layer of cylindrical shell is mu naught I square L divided by 4 pi into ds by s. Now what is the total energy stored in this cylindrical shell? It's nothing but an integration of this expression from lower limit a to upper limit b. If you do this math, you get the total magnetic energy stored between these two cylinders is nothing but mu naught I square L over 4 pi ln b by a. So it's time to combine all the results from electrodynamics we have learned so far. So the first one, divergence of E equal to rho by epsilon naught. This is true for both static and dynamic case. This is known as Gauss law. Second one, divergence of B equal to 0. Third one, Faraday's induction law, curl of E equal to minus dou B by dou T, or changing magnetic field produces an electric field. And finally, the Ampere's law, curl of B equal to mu naught J. So if you look at the history of electromagnetism, these were the results which came into existence before Maxwell made some of the telling contribution to the field of electromagnetism. So we can call these four equations as the summary of electrodynamics before Maxwell. Now if you look at this electrodynamics before Maxwell, there is one evident inconsistency here. Now what is that inconsistency? The fundamental theorem of vector analysis says that divergence of curl is always 0. So let's see whether the fundamental theorem of vector analysis holds true in this electrodynamics picture given here. So we have two equations for curl. Let's apply the divergence and see whether the result is 0. So let's first take equation 3, apply divergence. Divergence of curl of E. Curl of E is nothing but minus dou B by dou T. So this is divergence of minus dou B by dou T. These two are derivatives, so you can interchange them and write minus dou by dou T divergence of B. Divergence of B is always 0, so this is equal to 0. So in the case of electric field, this law is valid, no problem here. Now let's apply the same divergence to the magnetic field. Divergence of curl of B. Now curl of B equal to mu naught J. So this is divergence of mu naught J. Mu naught is a constant. You can take it outside the divergence and write this is equal to mu naught into divergence of J. Now for steady current, J is uniform. So divergence of J equal to 0. No problem here. But in the case of non-steady currents, divergence of J is not equal to 0. So the fundamental theorem of vector analysis is not valid here, which means this equation given by Ampere, there is an inherent inconsistency here, and we need to correct this. Now this is where Maxwell comes into picture. Now Maxwell quickly realized that the inconsistency here is a theoretical one. So what did he do? He tried to give a quick fix theoretically. He did not go to any detailed experimental procedure. He just played with the equation and he found a solution theoretically. So Maxwell took the continuity equation, divergence of J equal to minus dou rho by dou t. Using Gauss theorem, you can write rho as epsilon naught divergence of E. So divergence of J equal to minus dou by dou t, epsilon naught divergence of E. You can interchange these two derivatives and write this is equal to minus divergence of epsilon naught dou E by dou t. Now divergence of J equal to minus of divergence of epsilon naught dou E by dou t, or you can write a divergence of J plus divergence of epsilon naught dou E by dou t equal to 0. So if you add epsilon naught dou E by dou t to J, the total divergence becomes 0. So Maxwell corrected Ampere's law and wrote curl of B equal to mu naught J plus mu naught epsilon naught dou E by dou t. If you take divergence, you will find that the total divergence is 0. Now what is the implication of this correction? Look here, I have a changing electric field which gives rise to a curl in the magnetic field, meaning a changing electric field induces a magnetic field. Now the impact of this discovery was huge because prior to this people thought that the electricity and magnetism are two independent phenomena. Then Faraday showed that no, there is an inherent relation between these two. A changing magnetic field produces an electric field. Now Maxwell, with some mathematical manipulation, showed that in turn a changing electric field induces a magnetic field, which means an electromagnetic field can coexist as a self-sustaining system. This is the genesis of the field of electromagnetic radiation. Now the beautiful aspect of this theory is that Maxwell did not do even a single experiment. He just played with some theory, and within no time he got such an impactful result. Now in an hindsight, if you look at all this development, you may think that this was very easy for Maxwell. It would have taken him less than 2 minutes to come up with such an excellent result. Then how come a brilliant experimentalist like Michael Faraday did not see this coming? Right? It would have been so easy for Faraday as well. How come he did not measure this term in any of his experiments? Now if you compare these two terms, you have mu naught here, mu naught epsilon naught here. If you recollect the order of magnitude of mu naught and epsilon naught, mu naught is around 10 to the power minus 7, epsilon naught is around 10 to the power minus 12. So the second term is much weaker compared to the first term. So this was the 19th century when Faraday did these experiments, and the measurement systems were not that sensitive during that time. So because this signal was very weak due to the limitations of the measurement system during that time, Faraday was not able to measure this. Okay, so just by applying a symmetry principle, Maxwell got such an impactful result. Now, he couldn't show the existence of electromagnetic radiations experimentally. This was just a theoretical proposition which came in the year 1864. And around 12 or 14 years later, another experimentalist, Heinrich Hertz, experimentally showed the existence of electromagnetic radiation, and he also showed that they behave exactly the way Maxwell had predicted. Now, this particular term, epsilon naught dou E by dou T, is known as displacement current. Now, this is particularly important in the case of capacitors. As you know, capacitor consists of two conducting plates separated by a dielectric medium. Normally, current doesn't flow through the dielectric medium. Then how does the circuit get completed? In between the conducting plates, the current flows in the form of displacement current. So it's important in the case of capacitors. Now, using Maxwell's correction, now we can write all the four equations again. So first equation remains unchanged. Second equation remains unchanged. Faraday's law remains unchanged. Ampere's law gets the modification now. It's known as Ampere's law with Maxwell's correction. Curl of B equal to mu naught J plus mu naught epsilon naught dou E by dou T. So even though the first three equations came into existence before Maxwell's contribution, usually all these four equations together are known as Maxwell's equation, because these three equations became more meaningful after Maxwell came up with this theoretical correction to Ampere's law. So these four equations together with the force law, F equal to Q into E plus V cross B, they summarize the entire theoretical content of classical electrodynamics. Basically, they say that all electromagnetic fields, they arise from either charges or currents. So in summary, Maxwell's equations tell you how charges produce fields, and reciprocally, the force law tells you how field affects charges. Now you can do a homework. Derive continuity equation from Maxwell's equation. So if you recollect continuity equation, divergence of J equal to minus dou rho by dou T. So see in which equation you have J term. In the fourth equation, you apply divergence to the fourth equation, you can derive continuity equation. It's an homework for you. So in the next class, let's see how these equations which we derived in the case of free space get modified in the case of materials, in particular dielectric material. So see you in the next class. Thank you.